Before the keyboard, before the screens, before the quiet tapping of keys in dimly lit rooms, there was silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the heavy silence of thoughts that had nowhere to go, no buttons to press, no letters to summon, only hands, ink, and time. Tonight, we're going to drift backward, slowly, into a world where writing meant more than just recording your thoughts. It meant preparing, it meant effort, and most of all, it meant accepting that mistakes were permanent. You see, in the beginning, there was no delete key. There were no shortcuts, no glowing cursors waiting patiently for your next sentence. There was only the patient drag of a sharpened stick across clay, or the hesitant stroke of a quill over parchment that cost more than your shoes. To write something down wasn't a casual act. It was a decision, a commitment, a risk. And when you finally sat to write, on a desk that was probably just a flat rock, you had to mean it. Because every word, every letter had weight, not just metaphorically, but physically. The tools were heavy, the surfaces were fragile, and your hand, well, your hand gave up long before your mind did. Mistakes weren't erased. They were crossed out, scratched over, or left behind as silent monuments to your imperfection. Spelling didn't matter. Grammar didn't exist. Punctuation was a luxury that hadn't been invented yet. And spaces, those little breaths between words, weren't part of the language. In ancient Latin, there were no spaces, just a single line of letters, stretching endlessly, like a puzzle made of stone. You didn't read, you deciphered. And if your eyes wandered even for a moment, you might lose the thread forever, condemned to reread the same sentence 5 times until meaning slowly emerged from the mess. The act of writing was not about speed. It wasn't about clarity. It was about endurance. You wrote because you had to, not because you wanted to. And when you were done, hours later, with fingers stained and aching, you had something that wasn't just a message, but a relic. And yet, for all its inconvenience, people wrote. On bark, on bone, on silk, on skin. They wrote when it rained. They wrote when their ink froze. They wrote knowing that half of what they recorded would be lost, burned, misread, or eaten by rats. But still they wrote. And in those slow, deliberate strokes, the future began. Not quickly, not easily, but inevitably. Long before there were keyboards, there were stories. And long before you pressed your first key, someone somewhere was carving a thought into stone, hoping someone someday would read it. After centuries of ink-stained hands, broken quills, and letters that smudged at the slightest breeze, someone finally asked a simple question. What if writing could be faster? Not easier, just less terrible. And so the typewriter arrived. Not in a flash of brilliance, but in a slow, clunky march of levers, springs, and misaligned keys that clicked, clacked, and jammed with all the grace of a stubborn mule wearing tap shoes. The first typewriters weren't sleek. They weren't quiet. They weren't even good. But they were something else entirely. Mechanical. That alone made them a revolution. Suddenly, words could be produced by pressing things, metal things, buttons that triggered tiny arms, each holding a letter, swinging up and slamming it onto paper with the force of your intent and the strength of your fingers. It was loud, it was messy, it was beautiful, and it didn't care if your hands hurt. Every key press was a commitment. There was no going back. If you hit the wrong letter, it laughed in your face and printed it anyway. If you pressed 2 keys at once, they tangled like teenagers at a school dance, awkward, loud, and impossible to separate without making things worse. The typewriter taught you to think before you acted, to pause before you pressed, to fear the letter W because it lived too close to E. And if you were lucky enough to own one, you also owned a bottle of correction fluid, a thick, white lie you painted over your mistakes and hoped no one would notice. The QWERTY layout, yes, that strange arrangement we still use today, wasn't designed for comfort or speed or logic. It was designed to slow you down, literally. It was built to prevent the keys from jamming. Faster typing meant more jams. More jams meant more frustration. And so the solution was inconvenience. And somehow it worked. The typewriter became a symbol of productivity, of modernity, of authority. People wrote novels on them, reports, love letters, breakup letters, apologies, confessions, entire lives unfolded in ink, one loud keystroke at a time. But the sound, that steady rhythm of mechanical chatter, was more than just background noise. It was hypnotic, a kind of music made of metal and purpose. And for a while, it was enough. Of course, there were problems. Typewriters were heavy. If you wanted to write on a train, you needed a suitcase and a strong back. If a ribbon ran out of ink, your words faded into nothingness. And if a single key broke, your vocabulary instantly shrank by one letter. And yet, people adapted. They learned to fix them, to oil them, to clean each tiny arm with a toothbrush and more patience than most of us have today. There was pride in the clatter, a strange joy in the imperfection. Because unlike digital tools, typewriters didn't correct you. They didn't predict you. They simply recorded you exactly as you were. Every typo, every missed space, every forgotten apostrophe stayed. It lived on the page as a small, mechanical reminder that even machines were human too. As the last echoes of the typewriter faded into the background, those sharp, satisfying clacks replaced by the soft hum of circuitry and flickering CRT monitors, the world entered a strange new age. Not with fireworks or revolutions, but with the quiet, deliberate press of a key, connected not to ink or metal, but to electricity, silicon, and code. And yet, when the moment came to decide what this new way of writing would look like, humanity, and its infinite reluctance to change what isn't obviously broken, looked back instead of forward. We reached for the familiar, for the dependable, for the QWERTY layout that had once been designed to prevent a mechanical arm from jamming, now resurrected, digitized, and placed into a world where nothing jammed anymore. The first computer keyboards weren't pretty. They were heavy beige slabs with keys that clicked like tiny plastic tombstones and cords that coiled like snakes behind massive machines that whirred and blinked in low-lit offices. They had no flair, no charm, just rows and rows of rectangles labeled with letters, numbers, and mysterious functions no one ever used, like scroll lock. And yet they worked. Because, unlike the typewriter, which punched ink into paper with each keystroke, these new keyboards whispered to invisible languages, binary, hexadecimal, ASCII, sending signals that translated into letters on a glowing screen. You didn't see the mechanics, you just saw the result, a sentence appearing out of nothing, as if summoned by thought alone. But while the magic deepened, the design did not. We kept a layout, we kept the size, we even kept a caps lock key, even though no one had asked for it. The only real difference was what came after the key was pressed, and that difference changed everything. Because now, for the first time in the long and painful history of writing, your mistakes were no longer final. They were reversible. Impermanence became the default. A typo, once a symbol of human error etched forever into paper, was now a flicker on a screen, a moment that could vanish with a tap. Backspace. Undo. Delete. These weren't just tools, they were freedoms. And freedoms have consequences. We began to type faster, we began to think less. We wrote entire paragraphs without reading them. We stopped proofreading, stopped pausing, stopped caring. Because why worry? The keyboard would catch us, the software would fix us, the red squiggly line would point out our flaws before anyone else saw them. And so, slowly, typing lost its weight. The effort once carved into stone and echoed in the rhythmic violence of a typewriter became soft, quiet, forgettable. The keyboard was no longer a tool of permanence. It was a suggestion pad, where thoughts could appear, disappear, rearrange themselves, and drift into digital nothingness without ever becoming real. But even then, with all this power, the keyboard remained haunted. haunted by the logic of its ancestors, by letters arranged not for comfort, but for delay, by symbols we never use, and keys whose purpose we've long forgotten. Still, we accepted it, because deep down, the keyboard isn't just a tool, it's a ritual. It's the pause before the sentence, the click before the thought becomes form. It's a bridge between brain and screen, between silence and speech. And if you listen closely, if you really listen, beneath the quiet clicking of modern keyboards, beneath the RGB lights and ergonomic designs and wireless connections, you can still hear the ghost of the past, a distant clatter, a mechanical sigh, the sound of a machine that once tried its best to keep up with human thought and failed, beautifully. This is the keyboard, not a product of progress, but a relic of compromise. There is a key on your keyboard, quiet, anonymous, and unmarked by letters or numbers, that stretches itself out like a sleeping giant across the bottom row. It doesn't sparkle, it doesn't flash, and yet it is pressed more times than any other key you will ever touch. It has no sound, no symbol, no fanfare, and yet it might be the most important key you never think about. It is the spacebar, and it is the quiet spine of everything you have ever written. It is easy to ignore, easy to forget. When you type a sentence, your eyes dance across the screen, following the words, the punctuation, the structure. But you never look at the space between the words. You never ask, where did that space come from? It simply exists, like air between buildings, like silence between notes, like breath between thoughts. It is the most used key and the least appreciated. A silent workhorse performing its duty without recognition, without question, and without reward. Because while every other key demands attention, each one printing a mark, a stroke, a sound, an intention, the spacebar gives you nothing, nothing at all. And in doing so, gives you everything. Its purpose is emptiness. Its power is silence. Its meaning is in between. We often forget that separation is what gives shape to language. Without pause, there is no clarity. Without space, there is no structure. You would not be reading these words, you would be deciphering a puzzle of endless letters, collapsed into one another like houses with no walls. The spacebar doesn't just separate words, it separates meaning. It grants you time to absorb, to think, to rest. It slows down the flood of ideas just enough to let the reader catch up. And in that way, it becomes something far greater than plastic and circuits. It becomes a rhythm, a pulse, a breath. On early typewriters, the spacebar was mechanical. It was heavy. Pressing it caused the carriage to move. You could hear it, feel it. That solid thunk as the machine shifted to prepare for the next word. Back then, space wasn't invisible. It was effort. It was motion. It was real.
And yet now, in this modern age of whisper-quiet keyboards, illuminated screens, and digital noise, the spacebar still does its job, silently, reliably. It gives no visual feedback, no sound of success, and still you trust it. Because every time you press it, you know it has worked, not because something appears, but because something does not. There's a kind of elegance in that, a kind of humility. The spacebar asks for no credit. It simply makes room for others. It is the friend who steps aside to let others shine, the pause in conversation that lets something meaningful be said, the stillness in music that makes the melody more powerful. It does not add noise, it adds room. Room for words to breathe, room for sentences to stretch out and settle in, room for meaning to unfold slowly, without haste, without crowding. You could say it's the only key that makes no mark at all, but that wouldn't be true. because the mark it leaves is silence, and sometimes silence is louder than any sound. Try reading this paragraph without a single space. Try writing your name with no gap between the first and last. Try speaking a sentence with no pause, no breath, no rhythm. You can't, you won't, because the space is what makes the message legible, understandable, human. And perhaps that's the greatest irony. In an age where everything screams for attention, notifications, alerts, ads, sounds, signals, pings, the most used key on your keyboard is the one that says nothing at all, and yet you press it thousands of times a day, without hesitation, without praise. Because deep down, we understand, even in the chaos of modern life, there is wisdom in making space. So tonight, as you lie in the dark, eyes soft, mind slowing, words blurring at the edges, remember the key your thumb taps without thought. The one that gives voice to the silence, the one that holds the words apart so they can stand alone, the one that makes room for your thoughts to stretch and your ideas to exhale. The spacebar, not a button, not a tool, but a quiet act of mercy between every sound you've ever made. If you were to look closely at your keyboard, not with the urgency of someone typing a report or responding to an email, but with the quiet curiosity of someone studying an ancient artifact, you might begin to notice that not all keys are created equal, and some have lived quiet, forgotten lives on the periphery of modern usage, untouched by the rhythm of daily productivity and largely ignored by the fast-paced digital world that surrounds them. Nestled between the familiar commands and letters that shape our every sentence lie the quiet observers, keys that once served critical roles in a different era, designed with purpose and precision, now reduced to relics of an operating system that moved on without them. They are still there, of course, lined up dutifully like loyal sentinels on your keyboard, waiting for the moment they might be needed again, even if that moment never comes. Take, for instance, the once respected scroll lock key, a button that, in the early days of computing, offered users the ability to navigate long pages of information line by line, providing a methodical control over data movement that now feels obsolete in the age of touchpads and automatic scrolling. Once a tool of discipline and order, it now sits idle on most machines, rarely pressed, rarely understood, and seldom included in even the most detailed instructions. And yet, it remains, not as a malfunction or an oversight, but as a placeholder for a function whose time has quietly passed. Then there is the pause break key, whose very name suggests a sense of immediacy, of intervention, as if pressing it might stop the world, or at least the machine, long enough for the user to catch their breath. In reality, however, the pause key's purpose has long since faded into obscurity, a feature once useful in command line environments and early DOS systems, where pausing a stream of data might mean the difference between comprehension and chaos. Today, most users don't know what the key does, and even fewer have ever had reason to find out. It sits quietly in the top row, like a fire alarm no one expects to pull. Another resident of this forgotten class is the insert key, an innocent-looking button that toggles between insert and overwrite modes, a concept that feels both abstract and perilous in today's world of word processing. For those unfamiliar, pressing it by mistake can lead to an unsettling experience where each new character typed erases the one ahead of it, turning a simple sentence into a frustrating game of unintentional destruction. Many people encounter it only once, panic, and never touch it again. Its utility has become so rare that, on some keyboards, it has been replaced entirely, its legacy erased in favor of keys deemed more modern or relevant. And then, along the top of the keyboard, we find the function keys, F1 through F12, a row of mystery buttons that once held the promise of advanced control, custom commands, and specialized shortcuts, now largely relegated to niche tasks or ignored entirely by the average user. While F1 might still bring up help menus and F5 may refresh a web page, the full range of their original capabilities has been lost to time, known perhaps only by IT professionals and those who still remember the satisfying simplicity of a pre-GUI interface. To most, these keys are decorative, present but unexplored, like buttons in a foreign language elevator, pressed only by accident or under duress. And let us not forget the enigmatic numlock key, whose purpose,
toggling the numeric keypad between number entry and directional navigation, feels increasingly archaic in a world dominated by touchscreen input and voice commands. Its small indicator light, if your keyboard still has one, offers no real feedback beyond its own quiet persistence. It is a key whose entire existence seems to rest on a subtle binary truth. It is either on or off, and rarely are we even sure which. These are the keys we forget, not because they have failed us, nor because they are broken, but because the way we interact with our machines has changed so profoundly that their functions no longer align with our habits, and as such, they fade into the background, like old furniture that remains in the room long after its use has been replaced by something sleeker, newer, or simpler. They are not obsolete in the mechanical sense. They still respond, still function, still exist within the circuitry. But they are outdated in the social sense, pushed aside by interfaces that favor the obvious, the intuitive, and the immediate. And yet, there's a kind of quiet dignity in their continued presence, a calm persistence in the face of neglect. These keys do not flash or beep. They do not cry out for relevance or reinvent themselves to fit the times. They remain exactly as they were designed, patient and unchanging, content to exist at the edges of our attention, waiting for the rare user who still remembers how to call upon them. Perhaps, in their silence, they remind us of something greater, that not all value is measured in frequency of use or modern relevance. Some things, like forgotten tools in a drawer or dusty books on a shelf, carry meaning not because they are used often, but because they once mattered deeply, and in their continued presence, they preserve a connection to a time when every key had a story, every function had a reason, and every input required intention. So tonight, as your eyelids grow heavy and the glow of your screen begins to fade into soft darkness, remember the keys you've never pressed, the buttons whose names you've read but never truly considered. They do not mind being forgotten. They do not need to be needed. They simply are. And in a world obsessed with noise, maybe their silence is a form of wisdom all its own. Imagine, if you will, a world where the keyboard gradually disappears. Not with a dramatic crackle of sparks or the echoing final beep of a machine powering down, but in the softest, quietest way possible. A slow fade, like a familiar smell that you only notice is gone long after it's already left. One day you reach out to type a message, to begin your daily ritual of converting thoughts into digital form, only to realize that something has changed. The surface before you is still smooth, still rectangular, still the right size, but strangely empty. Your fingers find no keys, your thoughts find no outlet. There is only silence and the faint trace of muscle memory reaching for letters that no longer exist. At first, perhaps, you adapt. You speak your messages aloud, you tap on glass, you let your voice guide your commands. And maybe it seems easier. Maybe, for a while, it even feels liberating. But then, as the days pass and the novelty wears away, you begin to notice something deeper, something harder to define. Your thoughts feel less grounded, less deliberate, more scattered. The pace of your ideas seems rushed, like they're being chased rather than carefully assembled. And then it hits you. You are no longer thinking with your hands. Because for over a century, the keyboard has not merely been a tool of input, it has been a partner in cognition, a structure that shaped your inner monologue into legible form, a canvas with just enough friction to make you pause, to make you consider, to make you rewrite. And without it, your thoughts begin to run ahead of your expression. They arrive too quickly, unfiltered, and then vanish just as fast, like mist that never had the chance to condense into water. You begin to miss the sound, the cadence, the simple choreography of fingers dancing over plastic, not for the noise itself, but for what it symbolized, an alignment of body and mind, each key a checkpoint, each letter a step, each sentence a journey you had to walk, not just imagine. And in that process, meaning was born. In a world without keys, writing loses weight. Not in terms of its value, but in terms of its sensation. There is no resistance, no rhythm, no mechanical agreement between you and the page. Everything feels flatter, faster, more forgettable. Ideas come and go without ritual, without ceremony, without the small sense of satisfaction that comes from watching your thoughts arrive, one deliberate click at a time. Now imagine the children of that world. They grow up speaking to their devices, watching words appear as if by magic. They learn to communicate through icons, shortcuts, predictions, but they never learn to type. They never feel the joy of discovering the home row. They never develop the quiet discipline of returning to the same familiar layout day after day until it becomes second nature. And so, a certain kind of literacy begins to fade. Not the ability to read or write, but the ability to build ideas slowly, piece by piece, one keystroke at a time. For it is in typing, not just writing, that we learn rhythm. We learn to wait. We learn to listen to the cadence of our own minds. The keyboard, in its unassuming rectangular frame, teaches us patience. It teaches us focus. It rewards repetition and punishes haste. It makes us stop and think. And in a culture that increasingly values speed over depth, that is no small gift. Without it, language begins to shift, punctuation becomes optional, paragraphs become rare, thoughts arrive in fragments, messages shorten, and with every shortcut something is lost. A richness, a fullness, a texture, the kind of thinking that only happens when you're forced to move slowly enough to hear yourself. And so we begin to see that the keyboard was never just a board of buttons. It was a gatekeeper, a filter, a quiet collaborator that helped transform vague feelings into clear communication. Without it, we speak more and say less. We respond faster and reflect less. We consume more and create less, because everything becomes easier except depth. Now think of the writers who crafted novels on manual typewriters, who knew the sound of a bell announcing the end of a line, who had to pull the carriage back with each return. Think of the journalists who punched headlines on deadline. Think of the students who drafted essays late at night, illuminated only by the screen and the familiar clack of keys. All of them, in their own way, entered into a dialogue with the machine and with themselves. All of them learned to slow down their thoughts until they could be captured. What happens when that process disappears? What happens when there is no tactile anchor to hold a thought in place? We might find ourselves adrift in a sea of input, surrounded by endless ways to say something, but fewer reasons to say it well. We might find that the tools designed to make life easier have also made it thinner, quieter, less substantial. And while we can still speak, still gesture, still communicate, we lose the simple beauty of pressing a key, one letter at a time, and watching something solid emerge. So tonight, as you prepare to close your eyes, to sink into that gentle quiet that comes before sleep, allow yourself to imagine that simple gesture one more time. Your fingers hovering over the keys, your thoughts forming slowly, then taking shape. One button, one sound, one sentence, then another. That was your voice, that was your rhythm, that was your space. And though the keyboard may someday fade from our desks, it need not fade from our minds. Because the memory of it, of the way it felt to think with your hands, can stay with you. Like a dream you can return to, like a story you once told, like a rhythm that never quite leaves your fingertips. Because when we type, we do more than write. We remember. And some things, even in silence, are worth remembering. There was a time when every letter came with a sound. A time when writing wasn't silent, when language came alive not just on the page but in the air. And that sound, that distinctive, rhythmic clicking of keys pressed in sequence, was more than background noise. It was the music of concentration, the soundtrack of creation, the audible heartbeat of the modern mind at work. You could hear it from behind closed doors, from upstairs windows, from libraries and offices and bedrooms dimly lit by the soft glow of screens or desk lamps. Sometimes it was fast, almost frantic, a rapid staccato of ideas pouring out too quickly to be held back. Other times it was slow, deliberate, with long pauses between each tap, as if the typist were negotiating with every word. The sound of typing is not like any other noise.
It is mechanical, yes, but it is also strangely personal. Each person types with their own rhythm, their own pressure, their own inconsistencies. Some tap lightly, like they're afraid of waking the letters. Others pound the keys with conviction, as if every word needed to be hammered into the world. And in between those extremes, there is an entire spectrum of styles, speeds, cadences, each as unique as a fingerprint. We learned to recognize those sounds. We could tell who was typing in the next room. We knew when someone was writing something important. We could tell when they were frustrated or inspired or stuck. The typing stopped, then started, then paused again. And in those pauses, we could hear the thinking. In a way, the sound of typing was a kind of intimacy, a glimpse into the mind of another person. You couldn't always see what they were writing, but you could hear that they were working, that they were wrestling with something, that they were, in their own way, trying to make sense of the world, one keystroke at a time. And it wasn't just about the keys. It was about the chair creaking as they shifted position, the faint sigh when a sentence didn't come out quite right, the quiet backspace clicks as a thought was revised. It was about the environment that typing created, an invisible bubble of focus, of intention, of effort. If you ever sat beside someone who was typing, you might have noticed how everything else seemed to fade, how they sank into the screen, into the document, into the flow of thought and fingers. There was something almost sacred about it, as if the keyboard had become an altar, as if each keystroke was a tiny offering. But now, more and more, typing is being replaced by touch, by taps, by swipes, by voice, and with each replacement, the sound grows quieter, the rhythm less defined. The music of thought slowly fades into silence. And in that silence, something subtle is lost. Because the sound of typing wasn't just about writing, it was about presence. It was about being there, in the moment, engaged with the process of forming meaning from chaos. It was about that satisfying clack when your thoughts aligned with your fingers, that invisible applause for an idea well expressed. Even now, when you hear it in an old film or from the corner of a quiet coffee shop, it triggers something, a memory, a sense of nostalgia, a kind of grounding, like hearing rain on a roof or the pages of a book turning slowly. It brings you back to something that felt real. And maybe, in a strange way, the sound of typing helped us sleep better. Not because it was relaxing in the way ocean waves or white noise might be, but because it reminded us that someone, somewhere was thinking, was writing, was organizing the world into something understandable. It was the sound of effort, of meaning being made. Late at night, when the world was quiet and the house was still, the tapping of keys could be the only sign of life, a signal that someone was still awake, still working, still trying to say something worth saying. It was, in its own way, comforting. Not loud, not demanding, just there. And now, imagine a world where that sound no longer exists, where no one types, where communication is smooth, efficient, and soundless, where letters appear without effort, where words are chosen by algorithms, not shaped by hands. It might seem easier, but it is also emptier. Because when you remove the sound, you remove the ceremony, you remove the friction, you remove the proof that something real is happening. We underestimate how much meaning is carried not in the words, but in the way they arrive. The pauses, the pacing, the rhythm. Typing created a space where those things could live, a space between intention and expression, and that space mattered. The sound of typing was the audible trace of thought. It was the residue of discipline, the echo of effort. It was a slow-building harmony between brain and hand, between silence and expression. And now, Like so many useful things, it is fading, quietly, without protest. So tonight, as your thoughts begin to slow and your body prepares to rest, allow yourself to remember the rhythm. Let the memory of those clicks accompany your breathing. Let the cadence of keys, pressed in perfect sequence, carry you towards sleep. Not as noise, not as distraction, but as comfort, as continuity. Because somewhere, even now, someone is still typing, still pressing each letter as if it matters, still building sentences like scaffolding for thought, still choosing words with care, and somewhere, that soft, persistent sound continues, almost like a lullaby for the thinking mind. And if you listen closely, you might still hear it. Not with your ears, but with your memory. The soft click, the firm clack, the subtle pause, the breath, the next word. One more key, one more thought, one more sentence to keep you company as the night slowly unfolds.
In the beginning, the idea of a keyboard wasn't obvious. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't even very efficient. It was noisy, mechanical, awkward. But what it had from the very start was purpose. It was designed not to be beautiful, but to be useful. Not to charm, but to function. And like so many inventions that change everything, it began as a compromise. The earliest typing machines were clunky experiments, metal arms swinging into place, inked ribbons smudging characters onto thick paper, mechanical tension barely controlled by springs and levers. The QWERTY layout itself, the one you probably use today without a second thought, was not the product of linguistic logic, but of technical necessity. It was designed to prevent mechanical jams, that's all. Not to speed you up, but to slow you down just enough that your type bars wouldn't crash into each other. And yet, in slowing us down, it did something unexpected. It taught us rhythm, it gave us structure, it made us focus. The keyboard didn't win because it was the best possible interface. It won because it was good enough, consistent enough, and most importantly, learnable. Once you knew the layout, you didn't have to think about it anymore. Your fingers knew, your muscles remembered, and your mind was free to think. This, it turned out, was the real magic, the separation of input from thought. You no longer needed to look to write. You could close your eyes, you could drift, you could dream your way into a sentence. The keyboard disappeared beneath your hands and gave you the illusion that your thoughts were materializing directly on the screen. It became invisible. And in becoming invisible, it became irreplaceable. Over the decades, we tried to replace it. We tried handwriting recognition. We tried speech to text. We tried gestures and touchpads and styluses. But again and again, we came back to the keyboard. Not because it was modern, but because it was reliable, because it was predictable, because it didn't argue, and because it worked in silence, not in the absence of sound, but in the absence of resistance. It didn't correct your grammar unless you told it to. It didn't interrupt your pacing. It didn't suggest alternative words in the middle of a sentence. It let you finish your thought. In this way, the keyboard became something more than a tool. It became a companion, a mirror, a space where thoughts could appear safely, slowly, without judgment. And for writers, professional or personal, that meant everything. The keyboard won because it trusted us. It didn't demand gestures or swipes or visual focus. It didn't require your attention on anything but your ideas. It offered a consistent space for expression, unchanging from day to day, program to program, machine to machine. It was a rare island of stability in a world of rapid interfaces. And we, in turn, gave it everything. We wrote love letters, we wrote novels, we wrote resumes and cover letters and late-night texts we later regretted. We wrote prayers, poems, rants. We confessed secrets, we left reviews. We searched for answers, we searched for ourselves. We pressed keys to build identities, to build businesses, to build friendships. The keyboard wasn't just a writing tool, it was a life tool. It became part of how we navigated the world. Think of how many hours you have spent with your hands poised above a keyboard, not just typing, but waiting, thinking, starting again, erasing, fixing, feeling the subtle difference between a letter typed in anger and one typed in joy. The keyboard knew the pressure of your fingertips. It bore the weight of your indecision. And for all that familiarity, it remained humble. Just a grid of letters, just a set of possibilities. It never claimed to be intelligent. It never asked to be noticed. It simply waited. There is something beautiful in that. In a world where everything shouts, the keyboard whispered. In a time of flickering apps and flashing screens, the keyboard offered constancy. It said, "I will not change. I will be here. When you're ready to think, I'm ready to help." This is how the keyboard won, not with innovation, but with loyalty. And now, even as new technologies emerge, AI, predictive engines, augmented reality, neural input devices, there is a part of us that still returns to the keyboard. Because it doesn't get in the way, because it doesn't assume, because it doesn't interrupt. It simply lets you. There's something almost democratic about it. Every key is equal, no button more powerful than the others. Even the space bar, that long, empty stretch, holds weight. It holds silence. It holds breath. And that's the great irony. The keyboard, built to slow you down, has enabled so much speed. The keyboard, meant to be a temporary compromise, has outlived its rivals. The keyboard, mechanical and mundane, became the stage where billions of stories began. Tonight, as you lay down, let yourself imagine those stories. Not the stories themselves, but the beginning of them. The first paragraph, the first sentence, the first letter. The moment when someone reached out and pressed a key, and in doing so, made something real. The keyboard won because it let us begin. And again. And again. And sometimes that's all we needed. There are many tools that fade into obscurity once better ones emerge. The fax machine, the pager, the floppy disk. They once held purpose, and then they didn't. But the keyboard, strangely, stubbornly, silently, refuses to leave. Despite every promise of something faster, easier, or more intuitive, the keyboard remains. Not because we haven't tried to replace it, but because we've discovered that we don't want to. Voice recognition is faster, they say, but it talks back. It mishears. It needs silence. It demands performance. You have to speak clearly, pause unnaturally, edit as you go. It breaks the flow. It introduces friction. And friction is the enemy of thought. Touchscreens are more portable, more futuristic, but they lack depth. There's no resistance, no tactile feedback, no rhythm. You tap, you swipe, you hope. But your fingers never learn to trust the screen the way they trust keys. There is no muscle memory, just gestures. And gestures, by their nature, fade. The keyboard offers permanence. Its keys are placed exactly where you remember them, day after day, machine after machine. It doesn't change with each app. It doesn't slide or vanish or turn into something else. It stays. And because it stays, it anchors us. There's a kind of safety in that. A kind of quiet reassurance. When you open a blank document, the keyboard is waiting, unchanged, familiar, like a friend who always listens, never judges, and is always ready to help you begin. And maybe that's why we still use it. Not because it's the fastest or the most advanced, but because it gives us space, because it gives us time. Because it lets us think. The act of typing is a physical act. It engages your hands, it involves movement, and in that movement there is meaning. Thought travels through your body before it appears on the screen. There is friction, and in that friction something important happens. You slow down. You reflect. You choose your words with care. A touchscreen doesn't ask you to do that. It accepts any gesture. A voice assistant doesn't ask for punctuation. It flows forward whether you're ready or not. But a keyboard, a real keyboard, asks you to press, to decide, to be deliberate. And so we keep using it because it gives shape to the invisible, because it lets you build thoughts one letter at a time, because the weight of your hands matters, because expression, when slowed, becomes deeper. Even in a world obsessed with speed, there is still something comforting about going slow. Think about where we use keyboards: in offices, in schools, in bedrooms, in airports, on kitchen counters and cafe tables. Think about the variety of thoughts that flow through them: homework, business plans, apologies, dreams, notes to self, poetry, code, emails we rewrite 4 times before pressing send. The keyboard doesn't care what you write. It doesn't monitor your tone. It doesn't censor or guide or suggest unless you tell it to. It just waits. And in that waiting, it offers freedom. And yet, it's easy to forget how much this tool matters, because it's everywhere, because it's expected, because it's quiet. We don't marvel at its design. We don't celebrate its layout. We just use it. We forget that behind every tweet, every novel, every term paper, there was a keyboard, just doing its job, and that job is harder than it looks. It translates movement into meaning, intention into instruction, chaos into clarity. And maybe, just maybe, that's why it still matters. Because in a world full of distractions, it helps us focus. Because in a world of automation, it reminds us to participate. Because in a world of noise, it gives us silence. Not empty silence, but thoughtful silence. The kind you need to hear your own mind. The kind that helps you find the next word, and the next, and the next. So why do we still use it? Because we need it. Not for the letters, but for the space it creates. And when you're done, when you've typed your final sentence, when you lean back in your chair and read what you've written, there is a quiet satisfaction, a sense that you made something, that you shaped something, that your thoughts have weight. The keyboard reminds us that we are not just consumers. We are creators. And that, perhaps, is the most useless fact of all, and also the most important. That we still use it, because we still want to think, because we still want to write. Because the act of pressing keys still connects us to something real, something slow, something intentional, something human. So rest easy tonight, knowing that some things don't change. That even in an age of endless updates and shiny distractions, a keyboard still waits in silence, still ready, still steady, still yours. The keys haven't moved.
and neither have you. Not really. Your fingers still know the way, and your thoughts, when you're ready, will find their shape.
As the day winds down and the noise of the world begins to fade, there comes a stillness that is difficult to describe but deeply familiar. It's that quiet moment when the lights are low, the screens are off, and the constant stream of input finally slows to a trickle. Outside, the street's calm. Inside, your thoughts begin to breathe. There's a kind of hush that settles over everything, a welcome silence that doesn't ask for anything, doesn't expect anything, it simply is. And in the center of this silence, sitting unnoticed on your desk or beside your laptop or even forgotten on your nightstand, is the keyboard. Still, motionless, not glowing, not ringing, not pulling your attention toward it, just there, waiting with the patience only inanimate objects can possess. It doesn't demand, it doesn't distract, it doesn't try to sell you something. Unlike your phone, which vibrates and sings, or your television, which shouts and flickers, the keyboard waits. It waits quietly for you to return, for your thoughts to catch up, for your fingers to find their rhythm once more. And in that waiting, there's something incredibly human, something grounding. Because the keyboard does not change based on trends, it doesn't try to be new or flashy, it doesn't evolve with each season or respond to algorithmic incentives, it remains. And in doing so, it reminds us that not everything has to be reinvented to be useful. In a world that constantly demands speed and efficiency, the keyboard stands apart. It rewards you not for rushing, but for staying, for showing up, for pressing one key, then another, for letting your thoughts unfold rather than explode. And in that process, in that deliberate sequence of letters and spaces, something meaningful begins to take shape. Because the keyboard is not simply a tool, it's a portal, a place where ideas become sentences, where passing thoughts become paragraphs, where memories are given structure, where stories are born. It doesn't judge your spelling, it doesn't scoff at repetition, it doesn't mind if you delete the same line 6 times. It just waits for the next input, the next attempt, the next possibility. And that's what makes it special. It understands your pace, it adjusts to your rhythm, it holds your words without comment. It lets you stop mid-thought and return hours later as if no time has passed. There's something profound about that. Because in the end, much of our life happens in small, silent spaces. Between thoughts, between moments, between keystrokes. And the keyboard doesn't just occupy that space, it supports it. It becomes the companion of our silence, the backdrop of our reflection, the quiet witness to our private monologues. You've written apologies on it, resumes, questions you were too afraid to ask out loud, notes you never sent, dreams you half formed. It's held them all without complaint. It's seen your hesitations, your rewrites, your late night ramblings, and still it waits. It's never too much, never too little, never trying to be more than it is. There's a kind of trust there, a consistency we rarely find elsewhere. And tonight, as you lie there, listening to a voice talk about something as seemingly mundane as a keyboard, you begin to understand why it matters. Not because it's exciting, but because it's steady. Not because it changes your life, but because it lets you change your own. It doesn't interrupt you. It doesn't suggest a better way. It just gives you a path, a method, a process, a blank page waiting to be filled. And that's what we need sometimes. Not a solution, not a shortcut, just space. So as the night grows deeper and the quiet grows stronger, let yourself rest in the knowledge that some things don't demand your attention to have value. The keyboard will still be there tomorrow,
still waiting, still listening, still ready for whatever you choose to say. And if tonight you say nothing at all, if you simply drift into sleep, letting the comfort of this quiet story wrap around you, that's enough too. Because rest is part of the process, and silence is not an absence. It's a presence in its own right. So sleep well, and thank you for spending your time in stillness. Thank you for listening. The keyboard will be here when you return, and it will welcome you without a word.
Let us imagine, just for a moment, that you entered a room untouched by time. Perhaps an abandoned study, a forgotten corner of an attic, or a silent library where the air still carries the scent of old paper and soft dust. There, resting alone on an aged wooden desk, sits a keyboard, unplugged, dormant, not attached to anything, and yet somehow full of quiet history. No screen glows above it, no cursor blinks expectantly. It exists there as if it has always been part of the furniture, overlooked but enduring. At first glance, it seems insignificant, an object we see every day, a tool, a device. Nothing about its surface calls out for attention. But if you sit with it long enough, if you allow your mind to trace the rows of keys, the worn lettering, the subtle curvature of each button, you may begin to sense a kind of presence, hidden within the plastic and circuitry. Each key has a story, not its own, of course, but one given to it through use, through repetition, through thought, through feeling. Every hap of a key has been the endpoint of a decision, a hesitation, or a burst of inspiration. And though the keyboard remembers nothing, though it stores no memory of what was written, it has nonetheless carried the full weight of human expression. It has supported confessions typed out in the quiet privacy of night. It has echoed the frustrations of angry essays and the trembling vulnerability of heartfelt letters. It has helped birth novels, design systems, write codes, and finalize shopping lists. The keyboard has been there for all of it. Not because it chose to be, but because we did. That, in itself, gives it meaning. In an age where devices are constantly upgraded, redesigned, made more efficient, the keyboard remains stubbornly unchanged. The QWERTY layout, devised in the 19th century to slow typists down and prevent mechanical jams, continues to dominate our digital lives. We accept its quirks. We adapt to its inefficiencies. Because, over time, it has become more than practical. It has become familiar. This familiarity brings a strange kind of comfort. There is a rhythm to typing that is unlike anything else. The soft clack of keys, the cadence of thought being transformed into language, creates an experience that is both physical and mental. It grounds us. It gives shape to our otherwise invisible thoughts. Perhaps that is why it endures, because it offers something few tools do, a sense of stability, a bridge between the chaos of our minds and the clarity of written words. And when you strip away the noise of innovation and the pressure of progress, sometimes what you need most is something that simply allows you to begin. The keyboard does not rush. It does not interrupt. It does not correct you unless you ask it to. It waits. It listens. It welcomes every mistake, every draft, every rewrite. It has no ego, no opinion, only potential. And even now, in this imagined room, where the world outside continues spinning, where distractions compete for attention, the keyboard remains still.
present, quiet, as if it knows that its value lies not in being noticed, but in being there when needed. We have a tendency to overlook such things. We chase novelty, we celebrate change, but in the quiet moments, in those slow, late hours when thoughts settle and urgency fades, we often return to the familiar, to what has always worked, to what has always been ready to receive whatever we have to say. Think of the countless keyboards that have lived in homes, schools, offices, coffee shops, libraries. Think of the generations of fingers that have hovered over them. Think of the untold billions of words brought into the world because someone decided to sit down and type. All of it, from the most profound ideas to the most mundane notes, flowed through the same set of keys, and despite that, it never asked for recognition. It never sought acknowledgement. It simply did its job. There's a kind of nobility in that. It is easy to forget the tools that hold our lives together. The hinges on our doors, the zippers on our coats, the shoelaces on our sneakers, the keyboards on our desks. But forgetting them does not diminish their importance. If anything, their ability to blend into the background is what makes them essential. And so we return again and again to this tool that offers a place for our thoughts to land, a platform for our ideas to form, a medium through which we speak without speaking. Tonight, as the world slows and your thoughts meander through half-formed memories and fragmented images, consider this: that within the stillness, there is value. That within the ordinary, there is quiet magic. That within the keyboard, so often taken for granted, there exists a space where your inner world is given room to unfold. And when the time comes to share what you have found within yourself, when the urge to put something into words becomes too persistent to ignore, you will know where to turn. Not to something new, not to something flashy, but to the same familiar keys, waiting, not with urgency, but with assurance, not to push you, but to support you, not to speak for you, but to let you find your voice. Because the keyboard has always been that quiet companion, neither obsolete nor irreplaceable, simply faithful. In its silence, it offers possibility. In its design, it offers stability. And in your hands, it becomes a reflection of whatever you choose to share. Not a relic of the past, but a witness to your present. And that is enough. As the arc of this long, unhurried narrative bends gently toward its end, we find ourselves not at a conclusion, but in a kind of exhale, a release. Like when the final echo of a quiet song fades, and there's nothing left to do but sit in the space it leaves behind. This space, soft, slow, without demand, is where the rhythm of silence begins to take hold. Not every story ends with a climax. Some taper off like footsteps disappearing down a hallway, or like dust drifting through a sunlit room, visible only when everything else is still. And so, we arrive here. Not because we've reached the end of the road, but because the road has dissolved beneath our feet into something softer, something simpler. A kind of silence that isn't empty, but full of presence. In that silence, the keyboard remains, not pressing forward, not retreating, just present. As it always has been, as it likely always will be. We rarely give thought to the stillness of objects. We consider action to be meaningful and stillness to be a pause between value. But the keyboard teaches something different. It exists in stillness, not as a void, but as a container, a framework, an invitation to slow down not because we must, but because we can. Consider for a moment the way you type, the pause between thoughts, the stretch of fingers toward meaning, each key a decision, each word a bridge from silence to form. And yet the keyboard never rushes you. It never insists. It offers only options, and even those it offers quietly. What makes this silence so rhythmic is not its repetition, but its permission. A keyboard permits more than letters. It permits hesitation. It permits rephrasing. It permits abandoning an idea halfway through. It permits returning later, or never. That kind of permission is radical in a world that rewards speed and output. In the background hum of daily life, where every device interrupts and every screen flashes, the keyboard asks for nothing. It doesn't care whether you're composing poetry, writing code, drafting an email, or searching for nothing in particular. It doesn't care whether you press the right keys. It just makes space. And sometimes, space is the greatest gift we can be given. There are rhythms in life we never think to notice. Our breath, the slow tick of a clock, the turning of pages. The keyboard falls into that category. Its rhythm is not found in what it produces, but in what it makes possible. The way it gently encourages thought to unfold, one letter at a time. The way it reminds you that thinking, truly thinking, takes time. It's not a flashy rhythm. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't pulse or build. But it is there, beneath your fingers, steady and waiting, like a heartbeat you forgot to listen for. And that rhythm is part of what brings us here, to this moment. To this soft, dim space where the day has fallen away and only the quiet remains. That rhythm doesn't ask you to follow. It simply continues, whether you do or not. And somehow, that constancy, so subtle it can feel like nothing, becomes everything. You could argue that the keyboard is outdated, that it belongs to another era. But it is precisely because it hasn't changed that it becomes a kind of anchor. In a world that spins ever faster, where everything upgrades and updates, the keyboard reminds us that permanence still exists, that some tools, like some truths, don't need to be reinvented. It doesn't need a touch screen, it doesn't need a voice command, it doesn't need to learn your preferences or complete your sentences. It just offers rows and columns, letters and numbers, a place to begin, a place to return. And we do return, over and over, in early mornings and late nights, in classrooms and cafes, at kitchen tables and office desks, because we trust it, not because it's smart, but because it's familiar. There's a comfort in that, in knowing that some part of the world remains unchanged, that the path from thought to word still runs through these keys, that your fingers, even now, remember the way, even if your mind is tired. So, let the silence stretch now. Let it grow around you, not like a void, but like a blanket. Let each word fade not into conclusion, but into quiet. Let the rhythm of the keyboard soften until it is no longer something you hear, but something you feel. The rhythm of silence is not nothing. It's a presence so light it can only be felt when everything else fades. And tonight, everything else has faded. There is nothing more you need to do. There is nothing more you need to know. There is nothing more you need to become. You are here, and that is enough. The keyboard is still here too, waiting, always waiting. Not for your brilliance, not for your clarity, just for your return. Let it be that way. Let the rhythm continue even in your sleep. Let the silence speak, not with words, but with rest. There is something almost sacred about reaching the end of a long, slow journey, one made not with urgency, but with patience, not with noise, but with quiet intention. And now, as we arrive at this final part of our reflection, we are not rushing to a point. We are circling gently around a center that has always been here, silent, steady, like the keyboard itself.
Perhaps that's the true beauty of it, that in the end, the keyboard doesn't conclude, it simply ceases to be pressed. It doesn't vanish, it doesn't fail, it remains. And maybe that's what we've needed all along. Not endings, but presence. Not punctuation, but space. Not resolution, but rest. In a world that constantly asks for more work, more content, more connection, the keyboard offers something rare, a place where you can stop, just stop. Not because you have finished everything, but because you've finished enough. Each key we've discussed holds a story. Each character is part of a larger language we rarely pause to admire. We use it, yes, constantly, but we seldom notice its shape, its rhythm, its quiet role in holding our thoughts together. And as we come to the end of this video, we are reminded again, the keyboard isn't just a tool, it's a medium for everything we've ever tried to say. And yet, it asks for so little in return. Not glory, not perfection, just a touch, just attention, just a moment. Consider how many hands have rested on these keys before you. How many sleepless students, how many weary poets, how many programmers at midnight, or parents writing letters to distant family. All of them, reaching into the quiet through this same layout, this same configuration of shapes and symbols. Seeking clarity, expression, connection, seeking to leave something behind. The keyboard does not discriminate. It allows for greatness and error, for eloquence and babble. It allows you to create a masterpiece, or to erase every word, and it is fine with both. Its only job is to be here. When you're ready. Now, in this final stretch, the world around you has likely gone quieter still. The screen grows dimmer, the edges of thought begin to blur, but still the keyboard remains beneath it all, constant, familiar, gentle. Maybe you've fallen asleep already. If so, that's okay. That was always part of the design. But if you're still here, still listening, still breathing in the dim hush of this narration, then know this: you've arrived. There's nothing more to unlock. There's nothing more to decode. We're at the soft, worn edge of the story now, and here we rest. Not every tool we use must evolve. Some are perfect in their stillness. Some, like the keyboard, endure not because they innovate, but because they remain. What a strange comfort it is to think that, long after your thoughts have faded into dreams, the keyboard will still be there, waiting, not in judgment, not in demand, but in quiet anticipation of whatever comes next. It will not rush you. It will not remind you of deadlines or errors. It will not ask you to be brilliant. It will simply be, and that is enough. As the final words of this video drift into your mind, may you carry with you a sense of stillness, of peace, of the gentle rhythm that lives not in the noise, but in the quiet spaces in between. Sleep now, or don't. There is no pressure here, just a keyboard and the soft breath of silence.